Coming up on Reframed, along with this week's special guest, Carly Finlay. Today we'll be discussing Mallory Towers.
I live in Melbourne, of course, and I like to eat cheese.
How perfect. Like, that would be the moment where it could have gone wrong and it just didn't.
Because often we're the villain, we're the scary character, we are the tragedy.
I'm like, I relate on a spiritual level.
Welcome back to Reframed, the podcast that reframes how disability is portrayed in film and TV. I'm your host, Jason Climo, and today I have the wonderful Robin Lambert with me as my co-host, along with this week's special guest, Carly Finlay. Today we'll be discussing Mallory Towers, but before we do, let's say hello to Carly and learn a bit more about them. Welcome to the podcast, Carly. Did you just want to start off by telling us a bit about you and what you do?
Hello, yes, I'm Carly Findlay and I am coming to you from Wurundjeri country here in Naarm. I am very grateful for Aboriginal people for telling their stories on this land for thousands and thousands of years since the beginning of time. And as an author, I always like to give a shout out to an Aboriginal writer. And given this is a disabled themed podcast with disabled hosts and guests, I want to give a shout out to a disabled writer, an Aboriginal writer. So you should look the work up of Gail Kennedy or look up the work of Gail Kennedy. Gail is an amazing Aboriginal elder. She lives on the Eora Nation on Gadigal land, and she writes lots of young adult books, some graphic novels, and she's got a novel called Me, Ant-Man and Fleabag, and she also has a memoir coming out, and she's incredible. And she's also in Growing Up Disabled in Australia, which I've edited. So I am a writer, a speaker, appearance activist and arts worker, and a lot of my work is around disability and facial difference and appearance diversity. So my writing for the media has often been around the media representation of disability, has been around calling out, bad headlines, which is a regular thing. Also calling out ableist stuff that happens. Even though I hate sport, I reckon I've written 3 proper articles on sport. I think maybe because I also can't find anyone else to write as well, a non-disabled person's Rolodex, if we go back to the 90s, is really quite small when it comes to looking up disability contacts, it seems.
Yeah.
So often I've had to comment on stuff that seems a bit out of my field of enjoyment, like sport. I also do a little bit of radio and some TV, and I work at Melbourne Fringe as access advisor, and that means that I advise artists on how to make their shows accessible, work with deaf and disabled artists on putting on their shows, and advise our staff on how to make the organisation more accessible and making sure that we embed accessibility in everything we do. Aside from the work I do, I live in Melbourne, of course, and I like to eat cheese.
Don't we all?
Like to eat cheese. I've never met a cheese I've never met a cheese I don't like. I also started roller skating in lockdown number 2. We've had 6 lockdowns in Melbourne. I started roller skating in lockdown number 2, and I've been skating for probably nearly just over 18 months. And I'm not very good at it, but I can go forward very well. I can go backward a little bit. I can fall easily, and I haven't been anything.
Yes. Same. Very good at falling.
And the other day, I don't bruise very easily. I don't know if I bruise very easily because my skin condition means that I'm always red and you can't see my bruises. But the other day I did fall and my wrist guard protected me, but I had a massive bruise on my wrist from where it dug in, and I was very proud of that injury.
Battle scars.
So I've got that. I also really like wearing colourful clothes. And as a bit of a political statement as well, I feel like people don't expect disabled people to dress well or to want to take pride in our appearance. And so I wear what I want to wear and enjoy it. And are we allowed to swear on this podcast?
Oh, God, yeah.
Oh, great. And so on Twitter, most days I do a outfit photo and I say, "I wore this today and felt fucking fabulous," because I do feel fucking fabulous, and it's also not expected of someone like me to feel that way. And as a result of that, hilariously in 2020, when the Black Lives Matter movement happened, well, not happened, it was still, it was present well before that, but when it kind of came to a head, particularly in Australia, there was a big push to put more Black people of color on the covers of magazines. And I am a person of color. My mum is from South Africa. She's a Black woman, and my dad's English. And so I sort of facetiously tweeted, "Hey, can someone please put me on the cover of Vogue?" Because everyone was doing this Vogue challenge, and someone who was good at Photoshop did that for me. And then I said, "Hey, Vogue, like, call me." And then they did. They emailed me. They messaged me on Instagram, actually, and they said, "Hey, Carly, can you please write for our feature that we're doing on Black Lives Matter in the August issue?" And I thought that lockdown might be over by then and I have some glamorous photo shoot, but no, that didn't happen. I just had to submit that cover that someone made for me and then write an article. So no, it's good.
It's
How
pretty
amazing,
awesome.
though.
I like how it can happen. Like, I like how things, if you just literally put it out there, it can
Yeah,
happen.
manifesting.
Yeah, I mean, I don't believe in that woo woo, but I might believe in it when it happens. Yeah, I've published 2 books as well. Say Hello, and which is a memoir which came out 3 years ago, and Growing Up Disabled in Australia, which is a anthology, and it has 46 stories of people who are disabled from Australia. Some are intellectually disabled, some are deaf, some are migrants. So, there are actually quite a few gender diverse and non-binary and trans people in the book. There are very few white men in the book, which is, I really wanted to centre voices that we don't hear from. So, yeah, and actually, a memory popped up on Facebook the other day. I did the drum as some promo for the book, and I know that both of you are white people in wheelchairs, but I said that I would like to talk about how disability is not just white people in wheelchairs, because we only really see them on the drum, which is a good, accurate observation when we look at their guest list. And then the white people in wheelchairs got annoyed at me for being reverse
Classic.
racist.
Not great. You spoke a little bit in that awesome wrap of all the things that you've done, about having
Yeah.
to write a little bit out of your lane, about things that you're not
Mhm.
necessarily interested in, and obviously that shows that there's
Yeah.
some struggles for disabled people to get published, which is obviously a big feat for anyone to get published. But do you think there's
Mhm.
still quite a lot of barriers for disabled people to get published and to tell their own
Yeah,
stories?
absolutely. I mean, I, I feel like there are articles about disability that are written about disabled people with no input from disabled people. So stuff on the NDIS often has people who work in the sector,
Of
often has
course.
parents. There's books that are published about how hard it is to be a parent of a disabled child. Those stories are all given preference over disabled people's stories. And one of the things I find interesting, particularly in the speaking field, like in the kind of storytelling field, like oral kind of stories, is that it's very hard for disabled people to get paid because we're not valued. And so I've often felt like um, I have my privilege in that I have a speaking agent who can guarantee that I get a good amount of money. But then there are other people on that panel who often don't get paid. And they say yes because they need to get the exposure and the practice and all of that. But then it's just not fair when there are people who are doing the same thing as I'm doing and they're not getting paid. I had a situation where I spoke at an event for medical practitioners, and it's always really hard when you fight back around the "we don't have a budget" statement, um, and then they come back with a budget, but then it's always really awkward because you're then the one getting paid, and you kind of put yourself out there and put them out
Mm.
by demanding payment. And 2 people on the panel were there in the capacity of their job. There was a politician and there was also a doctor. So they were doing literally their day job and speaking. And there was me and another woman who had come as our freelance capacity. And I made a friend out of that woman, and I spoke to her afterwards on her podcast, and I said to her, off air, quietly, "Hey, did you get paid for that?" And she said no, and she said, "I just don't know how to get experience without getting paid." And I said, I feel really awful that that you didn't get paid, and it's just so unequal because these men were getting paid in their capacity and I was getting paid because I had to fight for it, but she wasn't. And I ended up getting that day actually. I ended up having getting an email from someone who said, "Hey, can you speak at an event?" And it happened to be clashing with an event I'd already said yes to, so I passed that on. And I think that's really important. If you can't do something,
Mm.
if you feel like someone else isn't getting paid, you got to speak up and say, hey, this person should be paid as well. And we see it particularly with intellectually disabled people as well, that
Mm.
they're not paid for the same thing that non-intellectually disabled people are paid for.
Yeah.
And I think we've just got to call it out for what it is, and that it's exploitation.
Yeah.
Like, you have us there in a professional capacity to give out, whether it's reliving experiences or, sharing insight. It's, why is that any different to somebody who's getting up and talking about, at that medical conference, about a new drug? It's not different.
Exactly.
We're there as a professional speaker to give our experience and to educate.
And it's kind of like
So
we're
pay
just
us.
waiting around for a good opportunity. Or one thing I get really excited about, and I know that, Robin, Emily Pryor.
Yeah.
And I speak with her mum a lot, and she said to me it's because of my campaigning for not working for free that she's helped to get Emily
Yeah.
a lot of paid work, at such a young age, and it's great. And I just think the more we say yes to working for free, the more that impacts the whole community, because people see disability as homogenous. And it's like, well, Carly said yes, so Robin's going to say yes, so Jason's going to say yes.
I think it also just diminishes the labor that goes into those things as well, like telling our stories and educating. I don't think people realize how much work goes into that, into creating that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And also, don't pay someone who is coming from their own lived experience less money than someone who is university educated, or or has years in a particular field. Like, our lived experience is valuable. So yeah, I think in terms of not being able to tell a story, there's definitely a barrier, but also being paid to tell a story is a barrier as well.
And just the last question I wanted to ask is very relevant to what we're talking about today on Reframed, is why do you think inclusion on screen is important? And also, why do you think it's important for disabled people to be able to control their own narratives when they're represented?
Well, when I grew up, all I saw on TV was a current affair talking about disabled dog bludgers, quote unquote, and also Paralympians. I know you're a Paralympian.
No offense, Megan.
You're all Paralympians, but neither of those applied to me. Like, I couldn't do sport as a kid, and I couldn't be out in the sun and the heat, and so there was no kind of possibility for me, and there's no relatability, because I thought the disability looked a certain way. I thought, well, people were either bludgeoning from the government or winning gold medals at the Paralympics, and there was no in between. And so it wasn't until I saw people on TV talking about disability, and I remember it would have been probably in the mid 2000s, I happened to see Stella Young on No Limits, and I didn't identify as being disabled then. But I saw her, and everything she talked about discrimination, I was like, yes, this applies to me. And was finding out about the social model and seeing different people who are different, even though our diagnoses are different, we still have these similar experiences around barriers, around identity, around disabled joy even. And so all of that helps. So to see a wide variety of disabled people on screen helps. I think in Dylan Alcott's Australian of the Year speech and last night on Q&A, he also said he wants to see a wide variety of people on screens and represented everywhere, because that's really, really important to have that incidental representation. One of my most proud moments is when I did the media for Say Hello. I got to do a few big TV shows. I did Studio 10 and The Project and ABC 7:30. And when I did The Project, a mum of a little boy with ichthyosis at the time, that's a skin condition I have, ichthyosis. At the time, the little boy was 4, and she sent me a photo of him watching me on TV and said, "Mum, that's Carly. She's got skin like me. I'm just like, wow, that's so impactful. And for someone to see themselves on TV, to see what's possible. It doesn't necessarily mean that person has to be on TV when they grow up, but to see that positive representation, because there's so much negative representation. We have shows like Embarrassing Bodies and Medical Incredible, and awful storylines around disability and tragedy and eugenics, and um, in TV. So that is really important.
I think the second part of the question was about why disabled people should be able to control our own narratives.
Yeah. Because we need to control our own narratives, because nothing about us without us. Like, if you're talking about disability, we need to be present. But also, one of the things that happens a lot with reporting on ichthyosis, and probably other rare conditions as well, is that we're really dehumanized. We're always dehumanized. So this week there's been an article about a little baby with ichthyosis that's been described. She's been described as a turtle because her skin is so hard. And you see this like snakeskin woman, mermaid baby. Like, there's never a human headline. And sorry to put a Darren Hinch kind of. I met him at the airport once, actually. Yeah, there's never that kind of humanization of a disabled person. And one of the issues, I think, is that parents are really quick to tell their child's story, to raise awareness, and that's really, really problematic. And often I'm the only person calling this out in the ichthyosis community, not so much in the wider disability community, but in the ichthyosis community. And it doesn't win me any favours. I got blocked by the mother of that baby for calling out the bad article with the line. But it doesn't do us any favour as a community, because, again, the perception of homogenization as a community means that someone reads this article about ichthyosis or sees that program and they're like, well, everyone with ichthyosis is like that, and I know everything now. There's a show called Embarrassing Bodies, which often gets rotated on TV, and I've never watched the show, but I have an opinion on the show, and I believe I can have an opinion because of the title,
Oh God, yeah.
And also because they've got people with ichthyosis. So every time I hear about this show, because people were like, oh, Carly, watch Embarrassing Bodies tonight, and I'll say no. People have argued with me that I should watch it to be more informed. And I said, well, the title sets the theme, like it sets the tone for the content. But every time that's on, because it gets repeated so much, I get, particularly when we could travel a bit more and we're working out of the home. I haven't really been approached in the last year, thank God, but I'll be on the tram and someone will be like, oh, I saw you on TV last night. And I said, oh, you can't ask that. And I'll say, oh, no, it was like on Embarrassing Bodies. And because people with ichthyosis look the same, they just assume that I was on this show, and then they argue with me like, you've got a sister, did you live in the UK? And I'm like, no, I'm an only child and I have a British passport, but I didn't live in the UK. And it just takes all this time to convince people that it wasn't me. And so that's really damaging. So our own narratives are important because we have to be in control of our story. And also, like, when kids are put out there on the internet, like, it's forever. And imagine that little baby reading that, her skin was described like a turtle, or her parents were devastated when they had it. Like, imagine that.
I think that's the
I
important
know.
of diversity too, because I think, for parents, their experience is valid, their lived experience, and they should have space to be able to talk about that in whatever way they see fit. But we need something to balance that, right? Like, we need disabled stories to tell about how growing up and your own perception of your disability changes and things like that. And then also,
Absolutely.
how the parent's perspective will change as that child gets older and does more things and whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But also, like, if we saw more like characters with ichthyosis, like in shows or in films, like those parents would possibly, I would hope, be less like, oh my God, I was devastated.
Yeah.
Like, because they've seen it, they've like got a better understanding.
Yep.
And it's represented out there, and it's not something that's like, oh my God, this is so scary.
Yeah. And I've definitely had that from new parents. But then, like, shows still continue to cast us in a really bad light. Like, I think the X-Files was one of the shows that had ichthyosis in a while ago, and it was just like, the person was kind of a freak of nature. It's never in a positive light, but I think we are chipping away at it, maybe slowly, with more widely with disability, but not so much with ichthyosis.
Yeah. There's a lot of work to be done, but we need to celebrate the small little wins we have along the way, don't we?
Yeah.
Yeah. So just to finish off, where can people find you to engage your services or
Mhm.
support you? Like, do you want them to follow you on social
Yeah,
media?
I mean, I'm at Carly Findlay, Carly Findlay, at on Twitter, on Instagram, and Carly Findlay OAM on Facebook and LinkedIn. I think that's my LinkedIn one. And also, I have a blog which is carlyfindlay.com.au. Say hello is at. I had the book sitting next to me now, but I'm in the middle of packing, so they're not there. Say Hello is available in paperback and ebook and audiobook. If you like the sound of my voice now, you could buy the audiobook and listen to go to sleep. Also, Growing Up Disabled is in those formats as well. And it's also Growing Up Disabled is also on print on demand, and you can print it in big font braille, other formats as well. And again, audiobook. My husband, who I wouldn't say he's my biggest fan in terms of like my work. My book came out in January 2019, and on January the 29th or the 24th this year, he just finished it. And I'm like, oh, maybe you can listen to the audiobook. Oh no, I'm just reading slowly. That's probably the only book he's read since I've been with him in 8 years, and it took him 3 years of that.
Oh my God. Love that.
So
It's
good.
fine. He loves me in other ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're very different. Granted, if he wrote a book, I probably would take ages to read it. It could have been some kind of Star Wars connotation or something.
Hey, opposites attract,
Yeah.
isn't that what they say? Yeah. Well, it's been so good getting to know you, but let's jump straight into analysing Mallory Towers. Robin, can you give us the rundown?
Sure. So it's an adaptation of a children's book by Enid Blyton called Mallory Towers. Interestingly to point out, I think the book was written post World War II, not very diverse, needless to say. So they've made a real effort with this adaptation to just be more diverse in general with ethnicity. And interestingly to us, there's a character with facial difference. But basically, it just follows Daryl Rivers, who's the main character, adventurous little tomboy who's going off from her home to an all girls boarding school and the sort of adventures that she gets up to in that process.
Love it. I think isn't she described as a tomboy with a ridiculous bob
Yeah,
haircut
I
or
think
something
so.
like that?
Yeah. I'm like, I relate on a spiritual level.
I love that. But yes, obviously there's a character with facial difference.
Yep.
And I want to throw to you, Carly, straight away,
Yep.
just to give us a bit of a rundown of how you felt the portrayal
Yeah.
was
Yep.
in this.
So in 2020, during lockdown, maybe number one, we've had a lot. I think that's maybe the second time I mentioned. I just want to,
Feel my pain.
You're like, it's been shit, okay?
It's really shit. Yeah. So, and I feel like currently we're still in a bit of a self-imposed lockdown if we don't want to get COVID because the pandemic isn't over just because we're over it. Anyway, sorry. In the lockdown, I was like looking for stuff to watch. I just felt like all of my work had disappeared, but then I was, like a duck underwater, like, trying to keep my work, the work that I had, or make more work. And I wasn't actually doing anything relaxing on a weekend. And so I put out a call on my social media, hey, what should I watch for streaming? And a whole heap of people were like, watch Mallory Towers. And I thought, oh, I haven't heard of that since I was a kid. I used to read Enid Blyton books a lot, and I know she was super problematic then. Um, yeah, so but I was like, wow, okay, great. And I love that people were telling me because they obviously know that I value good representation. And the reason they were telling me is because Beth Bradfield plays Jean and Beth has a facial difference. So they were telling me that from a facial difference representation perspective, it was really great. It was really well done. So disability is really wide. It's like got a big umbrella. It is a big umbrella. And under it has a lot of different types of impairments, I guess. And while people with facial differences might not identify as disabled or people with facial differences, I do. There are other people that do. I feel like we do experience the same types of barriers that most disabled people feel. And when I first realized the social model of disability, which is that society should change, not my body or not my face, that was when I realized I was disabled, like when I was in my mid 20s. And so um, I think seeing facial difference represented in terms of disability is important, but also seeing facial difference on TV is really important because often we're the villain, we're the scary character, we are the tragedy that like is burnt or the facial difference comes about because of a tragedy, or we're cast as the villain or the evil character, and so Beth in Mallory Towers is none of these things. She's not a hero. She's not a villain. She's just an incredible, herself, or as the character. And one of the things that I really loved is they actually don't mention that she's got a facial difference in the show. So I've watched the first series, and the second series is coming to Australia. I think it has been filmed, and I think it's out on the BBC, but not yet the ABC. And the character, Beth is, and I really don't, I loathe this term, but just like everyone else, and she is, not questioned about her facial difference. And I feel like curiosity is natural, but also when there is an example of curiosity, like in the media or in real life, it's like you always have to be that teachable moment. So if an audience member saw a character with a facial difference and another character interacted with them and were like, well, how did you get your facial difference? Then it would give that audience member the permission to ask in real life, So there was kind of none of that. It sort of set the tone about how we want people to behave around us, because
Literally.
there's no need to ask why we have a facial difference. Often we don't get this way, it happens. And, I was really lucky to interview Beth actually for the ABC. I interviewed Beth in late 2020, and I pitched it to the ABC because I was so excited that there's finally a character with a facial difference that was represented well, and it was just such a great conversation. And she talked about how she wants to be a role model for young women with and without facial differences, and that she really values just being a character where her facial difference is incidental to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's the big thing is like, as soon as Daryl was getting on the train and we see Jean
Yeah.
and she goes to sit down, I don't know if the two of you felt the same, but I just have always, when they're like
You're just
introducing the
waiting
disabled
for that.
character, I'm waiting for that. I've got this
Yeah.
anticipation like inside of
Yeah.
me, and it's like
Yeah, yeah,
building up. And I'm like, are they going to mention it? Is she going to be like, what happened to your face or something
yeah,
really fucked up?
yeah.
And none of
No.
that. And then it was just like, my little
It was
heart was
literally
like,
like, "This is
yes, they've
Jean.
done it
This is
right.
Jean. She's a good
Yes.
egg." And I was like, that was it. And
Yeah.
it
And
was
I
like
was like,
moving
oh,
right along. I
right.
was like, wow.
Yeah. And they just got on with it, and I was that was just
Yes.
really great. And it was just so great, like that incidental representation. That's what we need. We don't need a big deal. Just that. Yeah,
Exactly. Like, we don't need the spotlight. Like, it doesn't need to be shone on like
yeah,
the disability. It's like showcase the
Yeah.
person. Like,
exactly.
because, Jean realistically is just getting on with
Yeah.
it, and it's like everybody else can too. We don't need
Yes.
to make a huge deal of it.
Yeah,
I
and
love
Yeah.
that
and
part.
I think it really shows, like, the interaction, as you said, when she got on the train and, there was just that friendship from the start. It really demonstrates to children, to young viewers, how we wanna be, engaged with.
Yeah.
And so if they do see someone with a facial difference, on the train, they won't have a tantrum like I've had experiences of with children on the train.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's so important to have
Yeah.
it in children's shows to like get that representation started early and to start forming those perceptions when people are young and perhaps even when they haven't had, their parents' ideas put on them yet as well.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely, and they can form their own decision about how to engage, and also, like, often parents say, "Oh, don't look, don't stare, don't ask questions," and, that can be good in a way when we wanna be inconspicuous, but also not great because it shows that they shouldn't look at us. So I think that really sets the tone of how to engage.
Like you said, Jason, I was just like, I watched quite a few episodes just to get a feel for the show, and I was just waiting like for something to happen where I was gonna be like, and I think there was one point where one of the characters gets slapped, and she's looking in a mirror and she's going on about a bruise to Jean, and she's like, look at this big mark on my face, and I thought, oh, this could be like the moment,
Here it
because
is.
they've picked the character with facial difference, and she just like totally blew it off, like just sarcastic, like, oh yeah, you think it's a big deal, go to the teacher then, whatever. And I was like, how
Yeah.
perfect. Like, that would be the moment where it could have gone wrong, and it just didn't.
Yeah.
And then, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
I kept watching, and it was just all the way through. It was just kids being kids, getting up to the things that they do, and it wasn't pointed out at all.
All that
Yeah,
mischief.
so much mischief.
Yeah.
It was
It
great.
was super cute.
I think one of the only things like I would say, it's not like a huge negative, but it's something that, you know, as we progress and get more and more, you know, positive representation, the next conversation is going to be all about like, okay, there's more than one disabled person at that school, surely. So that was the only thing that I sort of really did think was, you know, if we were going to give them like a 5 out of 5 on the IDR scale or something, I would be like, I would want to have seen like multiple disabled characters, like at least 2.
Yeah, I
But
think that's often an issue, isn't it? Where you can't have too many.
Of anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't have too much diversity. It might be too confronting, but you can have a lot of non-disabled white people.
Yeah.
That's
honestly,
Yeah.
honestly, they're like just one from this bucket
Yeah.
and one from this bucket and
Yeah.
one from
And
this
they'll all be
bucket.
friends.
And then we'll just pull this one over and they'll all be
Yeah,
friends. Yeah.
yeah. I think
What are the chances?
I think you're right there with that. That there needed to be more, but that's definitely a start.
Yeah, for
Oh,
sure.
God, yeah.
But then maybe if they had a whole range of people with disability, the characters, then that have pushed it into the special school realm?
Perhaps, yeah.
And that's the
Yeah.
thing as well. Like,
Because you bring this
yeah,
up quite a lot, Jason, and I definitely agree. Like, surely disabled people at some point get disabled friends, or you'd hope so. They become part of that community.
Mm,
But my experience growing up, I was the only disabled kid in all 3 schools that I went
yeah,
to, you know, for a majority of
yeah,
the time. So I think, like, just to play devil's advocate, like that often is the experience.
yeah,
But it
yeah, it
would be
is for
nice to see
sure.
those characters grow as seasons go on, and to see them really invest in their own community and find a space there.
mm,
And I think we've talked about, like, I think it was when we were talking about A Quiet Place Part 2 or something, like where we said it would have been nice just to see like a supplementary
Mm.
character, or like somebody like who was a wheelchair user get eaten by the alien or something. Like it's not necessarily like another like
Yeah.
core key
mm,
character, but it's just showcasing that like
yeah,
this is not the only person
yeah,
at the
yeah.
school with this experience.
There's
Yeah.
really only ever one, and they're often a supporting cast role as well. Like,
Yeah.
did you watch The Bold Type?
No, I
So
didn't.
I love The Bold Type, and it's about working in magazines, and it was
Yep.
pretty woke. I don't know whether that's a right term to use. Has that been cancelled yet? I don't know.
I don't know.
It was diverse, and they had lots of great issues, like a bit protesty as well. But
Yep.
all in all, there was really only one disabled character, and as a support, you know. So
Yeah, and that's like, you know,
yeah.
similar to that. And just like that, the new Sex and the City
Oh yeah.
series, Ali Stroker was in
She
that,
was
and I
in
was
the
like,
other
oh,
one as
this is
well. She was in The Bold
oh,
Type.
there you go.
I mean,
There you
there's
go.
only one disabled person in Hollywood, I guess.
Was she like a boss ass bitch?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there you go. She's like obviously getting cast in that
Disabled
role
people get
a bit.
typecast too.
But also,
I mean, it was cool to see
yeah,
her like in a
Yeah.
powerful position.
yeah,
That's important as well, to show that like people with disability can like climb the corporate ladder and be the boss. But she was only in it for like, I think 5 minutes tops in Just Like That. So I was kind of like, this is a step, but it's not like many steps. We could do more. So the only other thing we often do sometimes, Carly, is do a little bit of research about what happened behind the scenes. The only thing I really found was I saw an interview where they'd said that their casting process was really open. They didn't actually have like too many predetermined ideas or kind of characteristics for any of the characters. So I thought that was like a really interesting thing to point out, because that's not often the way that casting, like I would say that I've never heard that
Yeah.
before ever for a show or anything really, usually they have like a very strong idea of who's going to be what, and they've picked their like one disabled person, and that this is who it's going to be, and this is what they're going to do. And I thought that was like a really kind of interesting thing to point out, which you know, hopefully some other people in the industry might start adapting.
So Beth could have played anyone. And
sounds
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it could have been Daryl that had, you know, the facial difference.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. Yeah. So that's what's really interesting. I guess probably then the only like disappointing thing, going back to the fact that there is only one person with facial difference or an experience of disability, you know, it is kind of disappointing that if it was so open, that it wasn't,
We didn't get more.
there wasn't more representation.
Yeah.
And that might have been that there's like actually barriers to opportunity as well, which is a whole other conversation. Well, I think unless anybody else has anything super important they want to share about Mallory Towers, it might be time to give our scores on the IDR scale.
Yeah, I would probably give it a 4.5.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Robin?
I said the same. Yeah, again, it would be nice to just sort of explore the idea of having, you know, those characters be invested in a community that they could find and identify with. But yeah, I think they'd really, from the original text, they'd really just tried to make it as diverse as possible. So they have kind of picked a little bit of everything. So I understand why that might not have been the case. Yeah, but I thought it was
I
generally
think if
very
you
good.
looked at it, like as general diversity, you'd probably say that it's almost a 5. But you know, when we're looking at disability representation, I'd agree. It's a 4.5 out of 5 for me as well.
It was so,
How
All on the
boring,
same
all the
page
same.
today.
it was so good, and it was so wholesome. And if we're ever in lockdown again,
my
just
God,
watch
I
it.
know.
I mean, watch it when we're not in lockdown. But it was a really nice thing to watch.
And
when we
like
were
such a
in lockdown.
nice, like, not to diminish it, but like a nice easy
Yeah.
watch too. And that's what we need
Yep.
sometimes, is like to escape the stressful. And actually in the same interview, they were talking about like escapism as well, and I was like, yes, that's exactly what I felt when I was watching it. Like I was like, oh, take me back to the schoolhouse.
When I talked with Beth for the interview, one of the things I asked is if she's friends with the girls that she filmed with, and she is. Like it was just really lovely that they all became friends on screen and off screen. And I think that seemed to be the same with the girls from the Babysitters Club as well, which was also released around that time. Also has some good disability representation in the second series.
Perfect. Well, that's it for this week, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us, Carly, and obviously thank you, Robin,
Always a
as
pleasure.
always. Thank you, everyone at home, for following along as well. Let us know your thoughts about what we discussed. If you have any comments or anything you wanted to talk to Carly about, you can flick them through to us as well. Or if you've got your own IDR score that you would like to share for Mallory Towers, you can find us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. So if you search Reframed Podcast or Podcast Reframed, you will find us. We also have an email address if that's more suitable for you and you would prefer to send your feedback through that way. It's hello@reframepodcast.com. Again, I just want to say thank you to everyone. But lastly, I do want to say a really big thank you to the Community Broadcasting Foundation for helping to fund this series. And that's it. And we will see you again next week with another fantastic episode of Reframed. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.